Did the highway ever feel like a trap before Aileen pulled the cold steel from her pocket? In 1989, she wandered Florida's roads, searching for a salvation that only came in the form of a stranger's headlights and a deadly decision. The man behind the wheel thought he was in control when he pulled over for Aileen. He offered a ride and a few dollars, never noticing the way her gaze stayed fixed on the dark woods lining the Florida interstate. Conversation died as the city lights faded. The man began to talk to Aileen in ways that made her skin crawl, unaware that the woman beside him was no longer a victim, but a predator waiting for a single reason. The sedan veered onto a dirt path where trees choked out the moonlight. As the engine died, Aileen felt the silence grow heavy. He reached for her, but stopped when he felt cold metal pressing hard against his ribs. Panic filled the cabin as the man begged for a mercy Aileen had never known. The struggle was a chaotic blur inside the steel cage. In that moment, the highway drifter became the author of a violent and permanent new chapter. The first shot cracked the humid air, silencing the crickets. Aileen watched the light fade from his eyes, a strange calm washing over her. The transition was complete. The road was no longer a path, but her personal hunting ground. Aileen moved with mechanical efficiency, stripping the body of anything that could lead back to her. The woods took his secrets, but she took his wallet. As she walked away, the ghosts of her past finally began to feel quiet. By dawn, the sedan was abandoned and Aileen was back on the blacktop. The sun rose over the pines, casting long shadows like bars. She wasn't running from the law yet. She was running toward a destiny she finally felt she owned. The heat of 1990 brought a new hunger that the first kill hadn't satisfied. Another car slowed, another door opened for Aileen. She didn't hesitate. She had found her rhythm, and the highway provided a never-ending supply of unsuspecting prey. Money was the excuse, but power was the prize for Aileen. She left the bodies in the scrub, shielded by wilderness. Each time she pulled the trigger, the noise felt quieter, and the world felt like it finally belonged to her. Investigators found the cars, but they were looking for a monster they didn't know. Aileen moved through motels like a ghost, changing her clothes, but never the cold fire in her eyes or the weight of the loaded .22. 7 men would fall before the cycle broke for Aileen. Each one was a temporary fix for a lifetime of abandonment. She wasn't just killing strangers. She was trying to execute the memory of everyone who had ever turned their back on her. Aileen survived on the fringe, blending into the neon-soaked grime of roadside dives. No one looked twice at the woman with the hard stare. To them, she was just another soul drifting through the Florida humidity, invisible and increasingly dangerous. Every siren felt like it was screaming Aileen's name. The weight of the steel in her bag grew heavier. She started seeing faces in the shadows, wondering which man would be her last, or which one would finally be her fatal mistake. By the end of 1990, the Florida sun felt like a spotlight. Every mile traveled was a mile closer to the end. The highway that once offered Aileen a kingdom now felt like a dead-end road, narrowing with every siren in the distance. The end didn't come on the highway, but at a biker bar called The Last Resort. Amidst the roar of engines and the smell of stale beer, Aileen sat alone, unaware that the shadow of the law had finally lengthened across the threshold. Inside the cold, cinder-block walls of the Volusia County Jail, the bravado finally cracked. Aileen spoke into a tape recorder, her voice a mix of defiance and exhaustion. She laid out the truth of the road, claiming self-defense against a world that had never defended her. The courtroom became a theater of the macabre. Aileen sat amidst a sea of suits, her eyes scanning the room for a face that didn't hold judgment. The media called her a monster, but she saw a woman who had simply stopped taking the hits. She was sentenced to death by lethal injection on January 31st, 1992. 10 years passed in a blur of appeals and mounting fury. In the silence of death row, the highway was a distant memory. Aileen's hair turned gray, her spirit hardened by the concrete, waiting for the state to do what she had done 7 times before. Aileen was no longer a woman. She was a headline. From behind reinforced glass, she watched the world turn her life into a dark myth. Every interview was a battleground, her words sharpened by a decade of resentment and isolation. The letters from the outside began to stop. The fans and the curious moved on to the next tragedy, leaving Aileen in the crushing silence of Broward Correctional. She realized then that the world hadn't changed. It had just found a new show. By 1998, the walls felt like they were leaning in. Aileen became convinced the prison food was tainted, and the guards were beaming signals into her cell. The highway was gone, replaced by a labyrinth of shadows and whispered conspiracies. Aileen fired her lawyers, claiming they were part of the system that sought to destroy her. She wanted no more appeals, no more delays. She began to demand her own death, a final act of control over a life she felt was never truly hers. On the eve of the end, Aileen refused the tradition of a final feast. She chose a simple cup of coffee, the black liquid reflecting the fluorescent lights of her final cell. The hunger for life had finally been replaced by a hunger for peace. The walk was short, but it spanned 46 years of pain. Aileen moved down the corridor with a strange, eerie lightness. The guards were silent, the air was cold, and for the first time in a decade, she was heading back toward the open air. The room was sterile, a contrast to the messy life she had led. Aileen lay back, the leather straps feeling like the seat belts of the cars she had once hijacked. She looked at the ceiling and prepared for her final hitchhike. At 9:47 a.m., the world went quiet. Aileen Wuornos was gone. No more highways, no more sirens, and no more ghosts. The woman who had been both predator and prey finally found the one thing the road could never give her: stillness. The sirens finally stopped, but the questions remained. In the wake of her passing, the boxes of evidence were sealed, and the files were moved to the archives. Aileen became a footnote in Florida's history, a dark sun that had finally set. Decades later, the blacktop still holds the heat of her story. She remains a symbol of the cracks in the American dream, a reminder of what happens when the world turns a blind eye. The road goes on, but the name Aileen Wuornos never faded. The story of the highway killer ends here, not with a bang, but with the quiet hum of the Florida night. Aileen's journey reached its final stop, leaving behind a legacy as complex and scorched as the asphalt she once called home.
Like and subscribe for more true crime.